Thank you to everyone for coming out today to support our second annual rally. We're really building a tradition here in Paynesville, and it's not by any one of us, but all of us coming together that we remind not just Paynesville, but all of Lake County and ultimately all of our community here in Ohio, that the United States of America was founded on our Judeo-Christian values and belief in God. We've heard so much today about our framers, our founding fathers and mothers, Betsy Ross, George Washington, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, who understood that a republic is a special kind of government. It's founded on principles of democracy, but limitations on tyranny, not just of a king, but the majority, because we live in a world where sometimes people make mistakes. But we have a special system of government, a federalist, a limited system of government that's been given to us, handed down generation to generation, that has preserved our freedoms. But it's wrong to view it as a secular institution. I know that each and every one of you has heard the phrase separation of church and state. The man who first used those words, at least to the best of any historian's knowledge, is none other than Thomas Jefferson. And he wrote it in a letter to the Danbury Baptist Association. He did not mean, by any means, that there should not be prayer in schools, that there should not be prayer before a government meeting. Far from it. When Thomas Jefferson was the third president of the United States, he literally used federal tax dollars to build churches on Indian reservations. There were Catholic churches, and Mr. Jefferson wasn't Catholic, but he said any Christian church is better than none. So for anyone who says Thomas Jefferson believed in a hard division between your faith and government, they're not students of history. They're just someone who's heard something political. But I also don't want to deify the Founding Fathers. I know that George Washington seems godlike. And by the way, he's here today. But it's easy for us. A round of applause for the first president of the United States. We wish he was back. We should send him right down to the White House now and relieve this other fellow of duty. But in all seriousness, folks, sometimes we step back from our patriotic duty because we say, I can't be like George Washington. I can't be like Thomas Jefferson. No one could be as great as Benjamin Franklin or John Hancock, Samuel Adams, all those heroes. And in fact, if you go into Washington, D.C. and you see the mural in the Capitol Dome, they depict George Washington as Zeus, surrounded by the other framers as Greek gods. And it's a very intimidating portrait, like many of the statues and memorials we see in Washington and throughout the country. And it was meant to be. It was the United States' way of saying to the royal courts of Europe, we're just as powerful as you, if not more so. Don't try again. We're free. So there was a purpose to it. But sometimes we look at those paintings, pictures, and statues and say, well, I can never be that great. There's no way I can make a contribution like George Washington did. But if you were to go back in time and see the real George Washington, you wouldn't see a man depicted as a god in a painting. You wouldn't see marble statues. You wouldn't see hundreds of millions of people holding dollar bills with his name and face on it. You'd see a humble colonist who fought for freedom. You'd see someone who couldn't even imagine a place like Lake County, Ohio, who would be amazed by the wealth and prosperity of the country that he founded. In fact, I doubt he would believe you if you told him that hundreds of millions of people would live from one shore of the continent to the other in a free republic that he'd founded. I think he would laugh and go about his business at Mount Vernon. Each one of the framers and founding fathers was a normal human being just like you and me. And they were not overseeing an empire of 50 states and hundreds of millions of people. You know how many folks lived in the United States in the 13 colonies when they first told Great Britain no? You know how many folks? You think it was 100 million? No. 50 million? No. Go lower. 10 million? 5 million? Nah. 2.5 million souls. Just 2.5 million people, less than a fourth the population of Ohio. You've seen elected officials throughout your life, collectively, You've even met 5 or 6 who represent more people collectively than George Washington and the Founding Fathers did. They started with a little seed, an idea that we could have a government that limited itself, that we could have a government by the people, for the people. And great things came hundreds of years later, long after they were dead and gone. The Bible teaches us that faith the size of a mustard seed can move mountains. Well, George Washington and our founding fathers had that faith and planted that seed. They believed that if they founded a nation under God, they could protect the liberties. They could give us the chance to pursue happiness. And they did. But they would have never imagined the United States of America that we live in today with its many blessings and challenges. They couldn't have believed it. I say this to say that any one of you might be Betsy Ross, Abraham Lincoln. Any one of you might be George Washington or Thomas Jefferson. And by the way, there's a double edge to that sword. By definition, if you make that great investment, if you plant that seed, there is no way you're going to live to see it grow. Even if your work reaches from shore to shore and sea to shining sea, you won't be alive to see it. When you plant a tree, by definition, you will not see it reach its full height. The one who plants it doesn't get to enjoy its shade. But it does mean that the work you do today is just as important as the work of our framers. Preserving this nation is every bit as important as founding it. And as Ronald Reagan taught us, we are always one generation away from losing liberty, and I have never felt closer to that than in this day, right here, right now. I'm not here to be political, but let me tell you something. Please, this November, vote. And make sure your friends vote and your family votes. Even if you don't tell them how, tell them they must vote. It's said, somewhat ironically, sometimes sardonically, that evil triumphs when good men stand by. I've never been a fan of that quote because I don't believe it's true. I don't think there's any such thing as a good man, a good woman who stands by and lets evil triumph. And if we stand by this November, we are every bit as responsible for what comes next as the people who do it themselves. So we must stand up together and say no to leaving behind the paradigm, the faith, the core values that built this country. We all enjoy the freedoms, but we need to remember their source. Ultimately, the Constitution, federalism, the United States of America are not the source of our freedoms. They're structures that the Founding Fathers wisely put in place to protect our God-given liberties. And what God has given, no man, no woman may take away, and we will not allow it. Not in this country, not in this time, not in this place. For this moment, we hold the torch, and we must hold it high. God bless America.